Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. The Palestinian Health Ministry says in Gaza, 34,568 people have lost their lives, while over 77,000 people have been wounded at the hands of Israeli Defense Forces since 7th of October. Since Israel unleashed the reign of terror on the innocent people in Gaza. Not only this, now Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is once again pledged to press ahead with the ground invasion in the southernmost city of Gaza Strip, that is Rafah. Let me quote him what he has said most recently. We will enter Rafah and we will eliminate the resistance group that they say they are chasing their battalions there, and with or without a deal, in order to achieve total victory. Unquote. We'll be taking this particular statement up for discussion and associated statements by Benjamin Netanyahu regarding the intention of a ground invasion into Rafah. On the other hand, we have seen the staunchest ally of Israel, the US. There is a little bit of difference of opinion and a view when we talk about Israel's plan to have a direct invasion into Rafah. White House, while the U.S. National Security spokesperson John Kirby has said the U.S. continues to oppose an Israeli invasion of the southern city of Rafah. Also, we have seen in the latest development, U.S. top diplomat Antony Blinken is in Israel and had meetings with the top leadership of Israel, including both the president as well as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, this is his seventh tour to the region since 7th of October. He had made a statement, let me quote him, "Even in these very difficult times, we are determined to get a ceasefire that brings hostages home and get it now." It's also talked about making more strides as to allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza as well. We'll be taking these developments up for discussion. In another major development, the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, has called for an independent probe over the Gaza mass graves. He has said it is imperative that independent international investigators with forensic expertise are allowed the immediate access to the sites of these mass graves to establish the precise circumstances under which the Palestinians lost their lives and were buried or reburied, unquote. All these matters of a discussion in today's show. For that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Sarfraz Ahmad Rana. He's security analyst. Mr. Rana, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. And also in the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Mr. Mustafa Haider. He is expert in international relations. Mr. Sayyid, thank you very much for your time. Pleasure. Also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Manzoor Afridi, foreign affairs expert. Dr. Afridi, thank you very much for your time. Also Pleasure. For being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. On Skype at the same time, we are honored to have been joined by Lt.Gen retired Uddin Haider, senior analyst. General Haider, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. If you gentlemen allow me, okay, let's start the discussion with you, Mr. Rana. Now, let's talk about this particular call that has been made by the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres regarding an independent investigation into the discovery of the mass graves over there in Gaza. In and around two major hospitals, the Al Nasser and the Al Shifa hospitals. The kind of findings that we had previously seen, that around 392 bodies with bound hands and the medical tubes still attached to their bodies, and at least it was believed that 20 out of them were buried alive. 65 bodies have been only identified because of the kind of torture and the kind of executions that took place with them. By looking at these findings by the civil defense, Palestinian civil defense members over there, what is the mindset behind the kind of torture that has been committed? Isn't it clearly a manifestation of crime against humanity?
Yeah, before I, make a comment on this very thing, I would just say this is absolutely reprehensible. This is absolutely barbaric, and indeed, as you said, this is a massive crime against humanity. And now, of course, that statement, by the United Nations, that is itself is a testament that how the Israeli authorities and Israeli military and the Prime Minister Netanyahu is basically directly involved in this crime against humanity. And now the responsibility to protect this kind of problem at a genocidal scale lies on the shoulder of the West. I mean, that basically preach and brag about protecting human rights, and human right violations are not in line with their liberal values and so-called liberal values and so on and so forth. So that's indeed the massive crime against humanity. And now, of course, all the international organizations, international regime must take the direct intervention into this, and the International Court of Justice must hold the Prime Minister Netanyahu and try for his involvement against this kind of
okay, is that
crimes.
a sort of a doable thing? Because the kind of statement that has come from the Israeli president says that the ICC's reported investigation into Israeli leaders as a clear and present danger to all the democracies and to free and peace-loving nations. What does that actually mean? There is an or kind of a speculation that arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and some other ministers could also be issued by ICC. So regarding that particular possibility, this type of statement coming from the president's mouth, what does that depict?
The president of
Israel.
Israel. I mean, it's like just putting some salt on the injuries of already that kind of thing. And what is the credibility of that statement? I mean, government and the official they are involved in this kind of crimes. So there is no credibility to this statement, of course.
Right, Mr. Syed, when we talk about the kind of findings that have just come forth and subsequent calls by some of the top UN officials, including the United Nations Secretary General himself, as well as the UN Human Rights Chief, asking for independent and immediate and effective investigation into the discovery of these mass graves and the kind of findings that have come forth from there. Is it possible to go ahead? Could we expect any sort of independent, immediate and effective investigation happening related to this issue in the near future?
Firstly, I think that it is to no surprise that there is a discovery of mass graves, because we have been witnessing real time, thanks to new media and the internet, the war that has been unleashed, or the genocide rather, that has been unleashed on the innocent people of Gaza. And we've seen it real time on Twitter, on Facebook, the images of what the innocent population of Palestine and Gaza have been subject to by the Israeli military. So the genocide has been tested by independent organizations like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and the United Nations Secretary General has time and again and consistently been voicing and for flagging this genocide, that this has to stop. But as we have been seeing, that the UN has been unable to put an end to anything except for rhetoric. And the time has come, Jawad Saab, that the countries like Pakistan need to stand up and call out Israel and take specific measures like South Africa has. And I salute the people of South Africa and the president of South Africa, who has taken the government of Israel, the state of Israel, to the International Court of Justice and won the case. But also we see that ICJ, like the United Nations, is teethless.
That's exactly the point.
Despite winning a month ago, they have still not been able to actually materialize and follow through with the judgment on the actual ground.
That's exactly the point. We have seen Pakistani authorities consistently making their point, especially when we talk about the Pakistan's permanent representative at the UN, calling out the kind of atrocities being committed and perpetrated by the Israeli regime over there in Gaza, asking the international community to play its role, especially when it comes to the responsibility of the United Nations Security Council in particular.
And I just want to add one thing, with your permission.
But I just want to make a point. When there were injunctions made by the International Court of Justice, South Africa took such a big measure also. So even the countries take such measures, but there is no end to the brutality that has been unleashed on the part of Israeli regime since 7th of October. So what's the way ahead?
That's a great question. Firstly, I think when there is a unified bloc that is going to take specific measures that are going to hurt economically, politically, at the UN, at every drop counts at the end of the day. You know, there's this narrative that, you know, what will one country or one leader be able to do? I really feel every drop counts, and one of the, I think, fallouts that Netanyahu personally will have is that he will not be able to retain his government because the opposition in Israel is voicing his ouster. And this is a very important development because he has failed the public opinion, and a lot of Jews outside Israel are, as we know, protesting in all parts of the world. But the bigger thing, Jawad Sahab, is that we have to understand that we cannot have any expectations from the Western community, because in the opening statement you said that we have to, the West has looked the other way. They have said basically in so many words, you go ahead with whatever you need to do, and we look the other way and pretend like nothing has happened.
So what's the possibility?
And the most we'll do is maybe usher a small statement in murmurs.
Up till now, exactly what you have just described.
You remember what Blinken, we just talked about Blinken, when he was there right after when the war in Gaza was unleashed, the atrocities were unleashed. When he visited there, he said, I am first here as a Jew. Then I'm here as the Secretary of State.
Hasn't there been a
imagine
shift?
If, God forbid, if a Muslim had gone somewhere and said, I'm first a Muslim, and then they would have said, look, this Islamic fundamentalism, Islamic terrorists, this is what we're
very important.
So this is the point that he said, that I am first a Jew, then I'm here as an American, then I'm here as a Secretary of State. So and in Germany, you can be arrested if you express yourself, if you exercise your right to express yourself peacefully about Gaza, you will be arrested. So I don't think we should have expectations from the West, but I have expectations from the global South, from countries like South Africa, from Pakistan, and civil society across the Western world, not the governments, but the civil society. You've seen what's happened in Columbia University. Yeah. People have come out. Yeah. But the government is on another end. But the people are with the people of Gaza.
How big an impact this particular public opinion that is developing so rapidly with every passing day might have in future when it comes to the policy of the US administration in particular is concerned? I'll come back to you, take your detailed view regarding that. Dr. Afridi, now the possibility of the investigation that happens to be independent as far as the discovery of the mass graves is concerned, and the kind of findings that have been coming forth after digging those bodies from those mass graves.
Well, it's Jawad Sahab, very much worrisome. We know about the genocide carried out by the Israel's government and forces. We know all the brutalities they have done, and now the mass graves. No doubt there is discovery of mass graves, and it is welcoming that the International Criminal Court has taken some kind of notice to have free and fair investigation about, and also the UN Secretary General is also concerned about the discovery and investigations about these mass graves. As far as the question of its free trial and free discovery or investigation is concerned, I think both things are possible. One, yes, it's possible if the West wants, if the governments they want. Why? Because such kind of mass graves, those were also found in in the decade of 1970s in Cambodia, when Pol Pot, he was a dictator and he killed millions of people, and after that there were investigations from the UN side, so it was made possible. We have also seen such kind of investigations in the civil wars in various African countries. Why not? If those were possible in those states, why not here in Palestine? Yes, possible. But if we see the current situation in this scenario, I think it's not then possible. Why? Because West, it's not very much willing. Right. It's not supporting the United Nations. It's not supporting the ICC. So I do agree with Said Mustafa Saab that yes, if the civil society across the world build more pressure if the students' organizations, journalists, and even other sectors of life, if they really build more pressure, if OIC, it can bring something very much concrete in this regard against Israel, right, then yes, it's possible.
And,
but political will is necessary,
political
which is,
will
I
is
think,
necessary.
nowhere.
So you already mentioned of student organizations building the pressure in order to get the desired outcome, perhaps in form of at least the independent investigation happening. But is it a far-fetched thinking or a very wishful thinking? I mean, we've seen the kind of protests which have erupted in the US, even in the European capitals, also in the
in Italy,
top-notch
in France,
universities,
in Australia,
the
in
kind of
UK.
treatment they've been meted out to.
In United States, in various universities like in Columbia University, in California University, at Berkeley, in Louisiana, at Texas, and even in North Carolina, at various places such demonstrations took place. But we have also seen those students, either those who are arrested or those who are dispersed. More than 1,000 students, those are under arrest by the US police, So if this move, it also spill over to African nations, to Asian countries, to the South American countries, then yes, we can hope something better that it can be materialized, right? And within the United Nations, GA, General Assembly, if the groups like G77, it can also play its a kind of instrumental role, then yes, we can hope to be materialized.
Now we are joined by Lieutenant General retired Uddin Haider, Senior Analyst. General Haider, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. Let's begin with this particular call for an independent investigation by the United Nations Secretary General, as well as United Nations Human Rights Chief, also the Palestinian Civil Defense Forces, about the discovery of the mass graves at the two main hospitals in Gaza, Al-Nasser and Al-Shifa. Do you see this sort of independent and effective investigation happening?
Well, it may not, investigation may happen, but cannot be said that these will be totally independent. The fact we must understand is Israel does not listen to anybody, not to United Nations, not to world pressure, and not to their mentor, America. It continues to pursue its own policies. It is not concerned about world opinion, about genocide, what is taking place there. And so what's the answer? Of course, International Court of Justice and these things do bring some pressure. And the public opinion in America, especially in the universities elsewhere, will bring some pressure on the American US government and also in Europe. But but Israel takes no heed, doesn't listen to UN, doesn't bother about world opinion, does not believe any rules. It continues its own policy. The answer is that the OIC has to become active.
General Haider, I seek your pardon for the interjection over here. Do you think this time, if Israel doesn't give heed to anyone, including the United Nations, its Secretary General, the ICJ, do you think they are going to hear to the call made by the Biden administration, particularly when we talk about their vow or the pledge to press ahead with the ground invasion in Gaza? Well, we have seen Antony Blinken, the top diplomat of the US, and also US National Security Advisor, saying that the US opposes any such plan of a ground invasion on the part of Israel into Rafah. Do you think Israeli authorities are going to listen to their staunchest ally there this time around?
Not necessary. Not necessary. They have not listened to them on this illegal construction of their colonies on the occupied lands. And they have not listened to them to have some restraint. They have not listened to them about the ceasefire, because they may something on the surface, they make a public statement, but inside they continue to support Israel And they have given them in the last 3, 4, 5 months billions and billions of dollars and billions of dollars of equipment and bombs which are raining on the helpless Gaza people. All this equipment and all these bombs are being supplied by America. So, and they have recently, Biden has asked for another $18 billion worth of injection, again into Israel. So when it comes to their personal interest, they even disregard America's advice. Blinken, of course, is running to many Arabian capitals, including Saudi Arabia, to make sure that the conflict does not expand and that other parties surrounding Israel don't get involved, because people sitting in Lebanon, elsewhere, if they join in, the conflict will get out of hand, and that's why they're wanting to limit. But as far as Israel is concerned, they don't care for human rights, they don't care for human lives, they don't care for United Nations laws. Unfortunately, they are very adamant in this regard. But the world pressure is building up by the public, if not by the governments.
Right, General Haider, now if the Israeli authorities don't give heed to this call by the US authorities of not to go ahead with the ground invasion in Rafah, also you've already described when we talk about that signing by the president of that foreign funding bill allocating $17 to $18 billion separately for Israel, at the same time, in the same breath, not advising it to go ahead with that ground invasion in Gaza and in Rafah, I beg your pardon. And if Israel continues to go ahead with that ground invasion in Rafah, what are going to be the implications? Because more than 1.4 million people are taking shelter over there.
America may be helping Israel by making such a statement, because their ground action in Gaza has cost Israeli army lots of casualties in deaths and in injuries to their soldiers, and lots of dead bodies and coffins are being transported back into Israel. And there is in the Israeli public lot of this, they're not happy with this situation of so many dead bodies coming into Israel. So it may be a good advice and a good face saving for Israelis that don't go to Rafah, and they may take the credit for that, but that may also be a ploy to not to go there and suffer more casualties. It's not an easy run. It's not a smooth run.
Right. So one last thing, General Haider, there is a talk about the renewed push which is led by Egypt regarding a ceasefire deal between the Palestinian group and also the Israeli regime. Now, Secretary Blinken is here in Israel in order to push for that particular ceasefire deal that, according to some media reports, is going to be 6 weeks, and there is going to be a halt in hiding with the release of 33 hostages being kept by that Palestinian resistance group. Do you see any sort of ceasefire deal happening? Is there a highly likely chance of it?
I mean, Israel is concerned about its hostages in the hands of the Palestinians, and so far their effort has been that as a part of a larger deal, first they should release these hostages, and then they say we will talk about ceasefire, but Palestinians are not agreeing to this. They say no, it will be a total solution in which there will be a ceasefire, an exchange of prisoners and exchange of hostages. So there where the matter stands. Qatar also, I think, is playing a part in this, and I hope that something comes out of this.
Right, Lieutenant General Retired Uddin Haider, Senior Analyst, joining us on Skype. Thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Rana, now when we talk about the possibility, do you think this time around Israeli regime is going to hear to that particular call by the US authorities that they oppose any sort of a ground invasion when it comes to Rafah?
I think there are multiple things that are taking place. For example, of course, there is a pressure on the current Biden administration. Why? Because they are just about to enter into the election, and of course, we had seen the protest taking place on in American University #2, and of course, as you mentioned, the public opinion. Why? Because public opinion had a very strong spot on the American foreign policy, right? And we had also seen the precedents in the past, for example, in the case of Vietnam, that how the American public opinion and the American people came out in the streets and they really pushed their government, to withdraw the American troops from Vietnam. So of course, there are certain things. But whatever has been happening so far in Gaza, that is a systematic destruction of the innocent people, number one. Number two, and this is not happening without patronage, and that is of course the Western patronage, I would say, and the American patronage in particular, right?
Well, if there is American patronage so consistent, especially let's talk about the 7th of October and onwards till right now as we speak, systematic destruction with the patronage of the United States of America. Now, why does the US seem so concerned about the ground invasion into Rafah? Because before that, we've seen setting aside $17 billion for Israel as a foreign, in the form of foreign funding bill. So why is the US concerned about the ground invasion in Rafah?
Why? Because of the domestic politics, at play. Why? Because the elections are coming. Number one, public opinion is boiling, is getting out of control. American universities and even Biden administration, within they are basically facing a kind of a very strong voices in their administration that the Israel must be now controlled, and Israel must be snubbed to take stop here. So I mean, of course, these are the factors, domestic politics at play and some other factors.
So if the US wants Israel to stop over here, why allocate a separate amount of $17 billion in that foreign funding bill? What purpose does it serve, as per your understanding?
Just to face safe.
Face safe in the eyes of the Israelis?
In the Israelis, and
there is
the Israel lobby.
Okay.
Right? Why? Because Israel lobby is one of the biggest, fund whenever any American president, get into an election. So they have to, raise some funds from the Israel lobby. So in the eyes of Israel and the Israel lobby, and if you study the book of Stephen Walt and John Mearsheimer, who basically been written on this specific subject, so you'll get to know that how strong and how powerful the lobby is. So of course,
actually, the book is called The Israeli Lobby.
The Israeli
That's
lobby.
the name of the book.
The name of the book. So
this seems to be a very complex. It makes me more and more curious about the approach at this particular time as far as the policy of the US administration is concerned. On one side, setting aside an allocated amount for Israel, and Mr. Rana is of the view that the US administration wants Israel to stop here and not to press ahead with the ground invasion in Rafah. If that is the case, don't these two steps actually seem self-contradictory? Mr. Sayyid, what's your point?
I think I agree with Rana Saab about domestic politics, and every political government has to make decisions based on domestic politics as well. They have to factor that in, because Trump has a very high chance of winning the upcoming presidential elections. The Biden campaign and Biden himself has to be very cognizant of the decisions and the signals that he will give, and as voting patterns will be dictated by that, particularly in his last few months in office, because the elections are in November. But so there's domestic politics at play, and then there's the Washington establishment, which is the Pentagon and the military industrial complex, which is also making a lot of money, by the way, because they've been selling arms to Ukraine, Israel. So that's a lot of money.
Okay, so
just the $17 billion deal with Israel, and they also approved with that bill. It's actually not the foreign funding bill. I think you're confusing it with our domestic politics. It's the military aid.
You just mentioned this is the election year,
which they also approved for the Ukraine at the same time.
Yeah.
There was the same bill which had Ukraine and Israel.
$94 billion. Dollars.
Yes.
So they've
so the military industrial complex and Pentagon is wired with Israel.
A question just popped up in my mind as you mentioned this election year. Also, the chances of former President Trump
Jawad,
getting
I'd like
advantage?
to add
I'll come back to you, Mr. Rana. Now, had there been Trump administration at the time of that particular incident that happened on 7th of October, had the picture been different or would it been the same?
I think that there is complete unanimity when it comes to Israel between the Republicans, the GOP, which is the Republican Party, and the Democrats. As vis-a-vis Israel, all of them are on the same page, even though they are incredibly polarized, perhaps more polarized than we are right now. But on Israel, they are on the same page. So, and while Trump is an unpredictable leader, I think on Israel, he would have been very clear and unequivocal like Biden, and definitely would have looked the other way and given his tacit support to Netanyahu. But my point is that what's going to happen in Rafah, if you want to look at the map and you want to look at the probables and the less likelihood and do some number crunching and speculate, I don't think there is, if you look at the behavioral pattern of Israel, anything will stop Netanyahu from going into Rafah, because he is stirring ultra-nationalism right now. And the only way out for him politically, with his people and with his government, is to not stop at this stage. And he said this very early on, that we will only end this genocide, as I call it, when we have finished our business. And he said we still have unfinished business. Unfinished business means that they will go into every inch of Gaza, including but not limited to this camp, which is full of innocent people, and again commit these atrocities. And this contradiction, this is talk, fight, is the by design choreographed policy of the United States to play to the gallery, to the UN gallery, to the international community. Oh, look, we are asking Israel to stop, this is way too far. But playing footsie under the table and saying, go ahead,
right,
we'll keep on criticizing you.
Right.
And that's very, very clear, and it's obvious.
The point is well taken. Mr. Rana, please make a quick point that you already wanted to make. Then I'll have to quickly move to Dr.
I just wanted to
Afridi.
make one point that, why? Because the Biden administration is going to enter into a, the TV debates and public debates very soon, after a few months or few weeks maybe. So they find it really difficult, to face the American public that, when they enter into a public debate, that they are hoping that and expecting that they are going to face kind of very, very terrible music from the American public. So, all these arrangements, as Mustafa mentioned about that, these are by design just to, face safe, so we can enter with the confidence that we have done something, just to stop the genocide over there. So I just wanted the public opinion, the public diplomacy is very, very strong thing in America when it comes to, the elections.
Right. Dr. Afridi, the possibility of the ground invasion in Rafah, and if Israeli Defense Forces go ahead with that, the implications of that. And do you think if once that happens, there is going to be a stern reaction as far as the US administration in place at the moment is concerned?
I think
in the light, I beg your pardon, in the light of that earlier statement President Biden made, he issued a stark warning to, that Washington's policy could change if Israel doesn't take care of this particular thing.
We will see about the consequences if this attack happens, but I think there are more chances of this attack. There are more chances of this operation because Israel doesn't listen to anyone. Israel doesn't consider any kind of appeal from the United Nations, from the OIC, from any other human rights body, organization, from even the United States, right? So many countries, they were calling for ceasefire, but Israel was not ready. So I think today is also the same case. Israel will not listen. And as far as the politics is concerned, as far as the political career of Netanyahu is concerned, so definitely it is in the favor and interest of Netanyahu also to go for this operation in Rafah. So we are, I think, very less chances that this attack doesn't happen. So I think it may happen.
So it may happen, and if it happens, do you see by these statements that we have seen from the US officials, is there going to be any reaction from the US side?
I don't think so, very strict reaction, because if we see the history, the US-Israel history since 1948, we don't have such example, you know, to have really very much hard and harsh punishment against Israel from the US side.
So what about the perception at the domestic front that has already been discussed with other two participants? Is it going to matter, especially when it comes to the election year in the US?
Yeah, it can matters, because if we look to the ongoing protests within the United States and in the universities, so it can spill over, you know, to other sectors of life as well within the United States. It can also spill over to other countries. Yes, maybe in 3 and 4 countries of Europe, those are already taken place, but in many other countries as well. So then it can build pressure. Then it can, you know, force the US administration for some kind of, you know, harsh policy against Israel. But the US administration will try its best on the one side to save its face, you know, to have a kind of, say, to have a soft corner, you know, for Palestine and Palestine people. But on the other hand, it will also try to safeguard its ally, its partner, its strategic partner, I mean Israel, within the Middle East.
Right, Dr. Afridi, you already also mentioned about ICC holding investigations into what Israeli Defense Forces and Israeli regime in Gaza had been doing now. In case, here's the scenario, if the arrest warrants of Benjamin Netanyahu are issued by the ICC, I just want to understand about the procedural matters, how that particular warrant would be executed or can be executed as per the international law.
I don't think so.
No, what is the procedure of it? What does the international law actually stipulates when it comes to the execution of that particular warrant is concerned?
I'm not expert, you know, on international law, but such statements are, those were also issued against the Modi, you know, about the trial and investigation, but he was not placed in front of the International Court of Justice.
Rana? Yeah, I'd like to add, I mean, the role of the International Court of Justice is purely advisory, and they do not have any mechanism, you know, to send any force or any international police just to arrest a, you know, head of the state. So, I mean, that is just out of the, I mean, they can just...
What about ICC? Isn't it different for ICC?
I mean, still the advisory role. I mean, they cannot send their force or, you know, any kind of mechanism. Why? Because there is no mechanism available.
So what's the significance or the
advisory role? I mean, they can declare.
They carry moral authority. Yeah. They
carry
moral
pretty
authority.
much understandable. What about the arrest warrants? What about that legal instrument which would be issued by the ICC? What about that? The execution arrest warrants are issued because they
lack the mechanism just to send.
That's exactly the
point.
They
lack the mechanism.
You're asking basically, Jawad, you're asking about enforcing their decision.
Yes, exactly.
They don't have any
enforcing ability, just like the UN.
So they just
like the UN Security Council.
Yeah.
So when they just issue arrest warrants for the sake of issuing.
It doesn't have to be enforced. The UNSC,
I think,
doesn't have to be enforced, but it carries moral authority. Yeah. It carries weight.
And also, you know, it comes and it is translated in a way that a particular country or particular head of the state is violating now international law. Earlier it was not violating, and somebody has violated international law, you know, he or she must be arrested now. So that has itself is a, you know, very symbolic value.
And I think
that still makes me curious, but we'll move ahead. Please go ahead, Dr.
International law is also one of the weakest laws of the world.
Right.
And second, I think it's even possible if the veto powers, all of them, they are on the same page, and then they want to have really an action against Israel, economic instrument or military, then it's possible.
When we talk about the instruments of international law, just for having an understanding of that, when you talk about the United Nations Security Council resolutions and their binding effect as per the UN Charter, right? When we talk about the resolutions of the United Nations General Assembly, they don't have the similar binding effect as that of the United Nations Security Council, right? So that resolution happens to be an instrument which is passed by the United Nations Security Council, keeping aside whether somebody is breaching. Once it is passed, it has to be implemented, it has the binding effect. When I talk about the procedural matter in the issuance of the arrest warrants for a particular leader anywhere across the globe, keeping aside Benjamin Netanyahu for a moment, when that instrument is issued by International Criminal Court, it means it requires some execution as well, or enforcement. That is exactly the point that I wanted to understand. Let's move ahead with that.
I'd like to summarize this entire thing. The justice in international relations is always of special kind. It is not given to you like, how poor are you or how oppressed you are, right? So it is given to you according to your proper place in international relations, right? So it is basically the power that dictates justice in IR. So that's just to summarize it.
Right. So, okay. What about the possibility of that ceasefire deal? Because Secretary Antony Blinken has talked about that Palestinian group being the hurdle in that particular ceasefire deal being reached for the release of 33 hostages, 6 week long, and it will end the fighting immediately for at least that period of 6 weeks.
I still doubt, the intentions of United States of America and the Israel as well. And if, it is done, like, it will be purely done on the Israeli terms and conditions. I mean, they will not take any kind of consideration that, 35,000 innocent Palestinians had been genocide, so far. So, I mean, it has to come like, it will come on the terms and conditions purely on Israel. Yes.
Now, Jawad, I just want to add an important point here, that when you say about, when you're referring to Hamas, I'm assuming, they have a popular mandate through which they have been elected. It's a political party. And this political party has legitimacy, which is why it is in Qatar. Erdogan just met them. And right now, President Xi Jinping is hosting, as we speak, Fatah and Hamas in Beijing and doing back channel talks to arrive at some rapprochement for this hostage deal, perhaps, and to broker a rapprochement in the Middle East. Hamas has been elected by the people of Gaza, and this is another very important thing which has been, they have been choreographed and painted to be a terrorist organization that is only bent upon violence. But actually this political party has been elected multiple times by the Gazans, and they have political legitimacy, and they are in government. This Ministry of Health of Gaza is actually governed by Hamas, and they have a lead cabinet. So and they have a local council in the local government. So they have a security wing which of course defends Gaza against atrocities like this. The little defense that Gaza is getting, the negligible defense from Hamas fighters which are on the ground, is because, thank God, they have a security wing. Otherwise there would have been completely no defense of Gaza, and Israeli tanks would have just come in and just crushed all the civilian population. So when we talk about this execution and enforcement of law, I think what will prevail right now more than ICJ judgments will be actually people writing to their lawmakers who are voting for giving aid to Israel. Because what is happening is arming of Israel with these missiles, with ammunition, which is being used on innocent civilians. So what people can do is they can demonstrate agency, they can demonstrate initiative, and write to their congressmen, write to their senators who are voting in favor of these bills, and mount pressure, because these senators and congressmen have to go back to their constituencies and face these people. Right. And this is another important point, is this is not a Muslim issue, this is not an Islamic issue. This is an issue of human rights globally, of innocent people, despite whatever caste, creed or religion they might belong to, are being killed. So people can
with
actually
impunity.
With impunity.
Right. Dr. Afridi, now one last quick understanding from your side about the prospects of this particular ceasefire deal, and especially when Secretary Blinken saying that that Palestinian resistance group is a major hurdle in this particular deal being reached.
I don't think so that it's a hurdle, because if we see the number of the martyr people, almost 35,000, right? So why not? I mean, Hamas or the Palestinians, they want go for this deal, they will, right? I think there is a problem, there is hurdle and obstacle from the Israel side. And if Palestinians, they are not regarded as really humans, we call it, we call them under the umbrella of the human rights, right? Then it will not work. But just suppose if it happens, so I do agree with Rana Saab that it will be on the terms and conditions of the Israel, because every time we have seen all those in the Camp David Accords, in the Oslo Accord, and before that even, if there was any deal for ceasefire, for a permanent solution between Israel and Palestine, so all those were in favor of Israel.
By the way, the US diplomat has urged that Palestinian group to accept this, terming it as an extraordinarily generous offer or a truce deal that has been proposed. Dr. Manzoor Afridi, foreign affairs expert, thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Sarfraz, Ahmad, Rana, security analyst, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show. And Mr. Mustafa Haider, I.R Expert in international relations, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. And thank you all of you, gentlemen, of such an insightful discussion. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.